Today I want to share with you how to make beet powder, or as some of you may know it, beetroot powder. It's wonderful for adding to drinks and smoothies to give a boost of extra nutrition. And it does double duty, because some people use it as a blush. Hi sweet friends, I'm Mary and welcome to Mary's Nest, where I teach traditional cooking skills for making nutrient-dense foods, including bone broth, sourdough, ferments, and more. So if you enjoy learning about those things, consider subscribing to my channel. And don't forget to click on the little notification bell below. That'll let you know every time I upload a new video. Well, I've got some wonderful beets here. So what I thought I would do is dry a lot of them and make beet powder or beetroot powder. I love adding it simply sometimes just to water and making a very nutritious drink. And it's also great in smoothies. And you can add it along with berries and yogurt and whatnot. Even if you think you don't like beets, you'll be surprised that you won't really notice the flavor. Beets are wonderfully nutritious, and I just wanted to pull up their information here and tell you exactly what's in them so that I wouldn't leave anything out. And they're rich in folate, manganese, copper, fiber, potassium, phosphorus, magnesium, vitamin C, iron, and vitamin B6. Plus, they're anti-inflammatory, or they have anti-inflammatory properties, and they're rich in antioxidants. So you can't go wrong. Beets are so nutritious. Now, there are a couple of ways that you can make beet powder. You can dry them in the dehydrator, or you can dry them in the oven. And I have found that the oven actually is the better, at least in my humble opinion, the better way to get the beets to be crisp, because you want them to be crisp in order to be able to pulverize them into a fine powder. If you decide you want to use your dehydrator to dry the beets, you certainly can. You'll want to set it at 125 degrees Fahrenheit, and you'll want to slice the beets very thin. And I recommend that you do slice them as opposed to grate them. If you try to dehydrate them and when they're grated, I find that it can become a little bit of a sticky mess. So set your dehydrator to 125 degrees Fahrenheit, slice the beets thin, and then dehydrate them for around 12 to 14 hours. But I really like the oven method. And you do the same thing, you slice them. I don't recommend grating them. It can, as I said, be a little sticky. But you can sort of do double duty if you want, depending on how many you're drying. You can make beet chips at the same time that you're drying the beets in order to turn them into a powder. I also find that it's easier to dry the beets and get them to a crisp consistency in the oven as opposed to in the dehydrator. But if you dry beets to make them into chips or into beet powder, and you've had success with the dehydrator, I'd be really interested in hearing that in the comments below. So let's get started to get these beets ready, and I'll show you how I like to prepare them. Now, you have a couple of options. I'm going to peel these, and I'm going to use the slicing attachment in my food processor to make the job go quickly. And I just want to give you a heads up. If you've never worked with beets before, they're red, or at least these ones are red. So I'm wearing red. I got a lot of red here because the juice from the beets does stain. It'll stain your hands, but I find it washes off pretty easily, and I don't like wearing gloves when I work with food. I like to be able to really feel the food. But I just want to give you a heads up that if you're doing this, red is the way to go. Now, if you don't have a food processor, no problem. You can slice the beets. You want to try to get them as thin as possible. 1/8 of an inch, quarter of an inch, they'll start to get a little thick. If you can get them 1/8 of an inch, that's great. If you have a mandolin, you can use that to slice them. But if you just have a chef's knife, you can do it too. Just do the best that you can. Traditional cooking or traditional food, nutrient-dense food preparation, things like this, there's a lot of trial and error, and there's a lot of variation. Probably ferments and sourdough have some of the most variation. But when it comes to slicing things and drying them, it's not perfect. Don't worry about it. Just do your best, and they'll eventually dry out and crisp up. Now you can also dry the beet greens as well. They're very nutritious. I'm actually going to chop these up and saute them with some olive oil and garlic and have them as a side dish with dinner. But again, if you want to dry these too, you can. They take less time. You can do these, and these actually do very well in the dehydrator. It's the same thing, 125 degrees Fahrenheit setting. But they take a little less time. You can start checking them around 4 hours, but they may take longer than that. You know, you never know exactly how the thickness is and so on and so forth. So there are a lot of variables, but you can definitely dry those in the dehydrator, or you can dry them in the oven as well. I'm just going to peel these up because I am going to remove the skins. Don't throw them out. I love to use these. I love to use the skins. These are all washed, by the way. I love to save the skins and add them to a mineral broth. It's wonderful. But I like to remove them when I dry them to make the powder, because I like the powder to be as bright red as possible. And sometimes the skins can make the powder a little darker, but it's really up to you. If you want, you can certainly leave them on. But as I said, I like to add them when I make a vegetable broth or a mineral broth, and I'll put a link in the iCards above where I have a video where I show you how I make my mineral broth. I love that. That's a wonderful option if you want to change a pace from bone broth. It's, you know, the vegetables that go into it are very rich in minerals, and it's so nourishing, so comforting. And it's something you really can make all year long with whatever vegetables are in season, and something that doesn't take very long to make either. Now, if you were just doing this with a knife, you just want to come in and just try to, you know, just try to slice them as thin as you can. Because the thinner you can slice them, the easier, or I should say, the less time it'll take to dry. And you'll see, you know, even these, when I do them by hand, you know, I'm varying. And I'll take a picture so you can see this up close. But my thickness, I do the best I can, and I just hope that I get them thin enough to dry. But I don't worry if they're a little uneven. Eventually, they all dry, and it's going to be fine. So I just want to share that with you to reassure you that it's going to work out fine. Now I'm going to finish this in the food processor, and I'm just going to cut it to the point so that I can fit it down the feed tube. And here we go. Now what you'll want to do before you get started with all the slicing and whatnot is to go ahead and preheat your oven. Now if you have a convection oven, that's great because it's got the fan and it helps circulate the air, but if you don't worry. And you have some options on what you want to set your oven temperature at. You can do this at 200 degrees, and it's probably going to take maybe 4 hours or so. You'll want to check them, check the beets periodically. Maybe take about 4 hours for them to dry. Now, you can shorten that by pumping up or turning up the temperature to 300 degrees Fahrenheit. But you'll want to watch them because you don't want the beets to become brown, like as if you were really making them chips, because that distorts the color. And I personally really like to keep these as nutrient rich as possible. And the higher temperature at which you cook them may affect more of the nutrients in beets, whereas the lower temperature that you can cook them at will preserve more of the nutrients. So if you've got the time and you can put them at 200, even if you have an oven that goes down to 150 or 170, then it'll, you know, that 4 hours will go out a little longer. But I've found that 200 works well. You're not cooking them, you're drying them, and they're becoming crisp, and it's going to take about 4 hours. So I'm going to go ahead and continue cleaning these up and getting these beets ready, and I'll show you how we prepare them for the oven. Well, I've got all my beets sliced up here, and then I've got my scraps that I'm going to save for my mineral broth over here. I've got my greens here, and I'll cook those later. And I just want to mention that I also cook the stalks, and if you dehydrate, if you decide to dry the leaves or dehydrate them, you can also dehydrate or dry the stalks as well. Now for drying these in the oven, you're going to want to get a baking sheet. I've lined this with parchment just for easy cleanup in case any liquid drains off the beets. And then I'm going to use a rack like this because it helps with the air circulation and it helps with the drying time. But don't worry if you don't have this. If all you have is the baking sheet and the parchment paper, that's fine. You can put the beets right onto the parchment paper and they will dry. So all I'm going to do here is just lay the beets right onto the baking sheet like this, onto the rack that I have on my baking sheet, or if you're doing it with just the parchment paper, you can just lie it right onto the parchment paper. And that's all we're going to do. Just leave a little space between each one, nothing fancy, and then we're going to go ahead and pop them in the preheated oven that's been preheated to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, I've got this first sheet ready. I'm going to go ahead and prepare the rest of the sheets, the rest of the baking sheets with the beets on them, and get them into the oven, and then I'll show you how they look when they're dried up, and we'll go through the next steps to turn them into powder. Well, I've got a batch of beets here, the sliced beets that are all dry now. They were in the oven at 200 degrees for about 4 hours. And I'll take a close-up picture and I'll overlay it so that you can see exactly what they look like, but they shrink considerably. But the most important thing, more so than how they look, what you're looking for is how they sound. And this is what you want. Like a chip, really hard, or a cracker even. Hear that? That's what you're looking for. Now I like to use one of these little coffee grinder, spice grinder machines to grind this all into a powder. If you have one of those fancy high-speed blenders, that'll probably do a fabulous job. And you probably can pulverize them even in a regular blender. You may just need to stop and start it periodically and stir everything around to make sure that it becomes nicely pulverized. But I love these little spice grinders. These are so handy. I actually have 3 of them. I use one for coffee beans, one for herbs and spices, and another for grinding oat groats. If you've seen me make, I like to make oatmeal starting with oat groats. And so it's nice to pulverize them in there. But in any event, we're just gonna get these into here. And you just gotta take your time, be patient. If you have, as I said, one of those big high-speed blenders, you can do it a lot quicker. But I don't mind this at all, and I find that the texture is fantastic. Alrighty, so I'm just gonna partially fill that, and I'm gonna put the lid on. And now I'm just gonna go ahead and pulverize this. Alrighty, now I don't hear any more bits banging around, so I'm just gonna kind of tap this a little to get some of that dust off, or the beet powder off. And I'll take some out on a spoon and I'll take a picture and show it to you. So that's the powdery consistency that you're looking for. And I'm going to overlay a little video of that so you can see that up close. So you'll know you're looking for a very fine textured powder. So now I'm going to go ahead and pulverize all the rest of my dried beets, and then I'll show you how we mix this up and make a nice beverage with it. Now the way I like to make this into a drink, I'm trying just to scoop up some of this, is to put about a teaspoon in a glass, add the water, and then, like room temperature water, and then to cool it down and make it a refreshing beverage, I'll add the ice after the fact. But I find that it mixes much better if you do it this way. So I'll go ahead, I've got the beets in there, the beet powder. I'll go ahead and add in my water. Just got about a cup of room temperature water. Then I take a whisk, I find this works the best, and just give it a stir. Yeah, see, everything dissolved pretty quickly, thanks to the room temperature water. And then if I want to make this a cool beverage, I'll just go ahead and add in my ice after the fact, now that all the beet powder is dissolved in the water. Oops, what got away from me? And that's basically all I do. And then I take a straw, just give it another stir to cool it off, and then you've just got this lovely beet juice beverage. It tastes delicious. It's not very strong beet flavor at all. It's just very nice. And if you want, you can take this powder and you can add this into smoothies, you can add it into soups. It's so versatile. There's so much that you can do with this. And I love the fact that I'm just getting so many vitamins and minerals and antioxidants and anti-inflammatory compounds from it. It makes me very happy to enjoy beet juice. And doing it this way with the powder, I try to take the beet powder in some form or another every day. Now, shelf life. I do refrigerate this. I don't put this in the pantry. And the reason is, and I think you can tell when I was showing you, even though I got these dry and crisp, and I have found this to be the case whether you do it in the oven or in the dehydrator, that to a certain extent, there you can see there's just some moisture. And so I don't want to risk putting this in the pantry. So I put it in the refrigerator. And I think refrigerated and in this form, I'm thinking that it's good for at least 6 months. But something I do think will help with shelf life, even as it's refrigerated, is putting one of those oxygen absorbers in here. I've used them for some of my other dehydrated foods that I just leave on the shelf. But as I said, I like to refrigerate this, and I think I'll put one of those in here. And then this has got a nice tight clamp, nice, fairly, I guess, airtight seal, as airtight as something like this can be. And it'll have the oxygen absorber, and then I'll put it in my refrigerator. And I think that's going to store up quite nicely. So I hope you'll give beet powder a try. I love having it on hand. And if you'd like to learn more about traditional cooking, be sure to subscribe to my channel, and then click on this video over here where I show you how to make a mineral broth, more vitamins and minerals. And I'll see you over there in my Texas Hill Country kitchen. Love and God bless.